And greetings YouTube gamers, welcome to another episode of Retro Raider. My name is Johnny Retro and welcome to the channel. So guys, today I'm going to talk about a game that by now I think that everybody has heard about it before, even if you haven't played it yet. And that game is EarthBound for the Super Nintendo. Now the reason why I'm bringing EarthBound to the channel today, it's because I just finished the game for the very first time. The game is still very fresh in my head, I've been playing it for the last couple of weeks, and it is a game that it has been on my to-play list for a long time. But only now I took the time to focus on it. But this is not going to be a review of the game. For that there's a lot of information out there. This is just me telling you what the game made me feel, and the reason why I think that everybody should give it a try. By the way guys, if you're new on the channel, feel free to subscribe and watch a couple of my older videos. But first I want to tell you guys how I first heard about EarthBound. So this goes way back into 2010 more or less. I think it was 8 to 9 years ago, and that was the time when I started to collect for the Super Nintendo. So I jumped into the Super Nintendo very late, and the reason for that is because, Super Nintendo is a system that it doesn't bring me a lot of memories from my childhood. Growing up here in Portugal, Europe, the Mega Drive was a lot more popular than the Super Nintendo. Even the Master System was more successful than the NES. So pretty much everybody that I knew had a Mega Drive. And then of course moving on to the 3D era, everybody was playing the Sega Saturn or the PS1. And the Super Nintendo of course was left a little bit behind. But then on my early 20s, I was very much into retro gaming at the time. And I always wanted to have a Super Nintendo, mainly to play JRPGs. Because the Super Nintendo is like, the Mecca of the 16-bit era of RPGs. So I always wanted to give it a try to games like, A Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, Chrono Trigger, The Secret of Mana, stuff like that. Iconic games, and a lot of these RPGs were never released here in Europe. So when I got my Super Nintendo, I really was a noob on that system. So I started looking for RPGs online, I went to a lot of forums, I saw a lot of, top 10 and top 5 videos. I did a lot of research, and one game that was always popping out was EarthBound, a game that it was completely unknown to me. And with a good reason, because the game was never released here in Europe. The game was released in North America under the name of EarthBound, and of course the original game is part of the Mother series. It is called Mother 2 in Japan. And I remembered that the stuff that I saw at that time about EarthBound, it really caught my attention, because it looked very different from the stuff that I was playing at the time. The setting of the game, the setting of a world similar to ours in the 90s. And even the look of the characters, they didn't look like the traditional JRPG sprites. If you compare NES to Chrono, it was very bizarre, but in a good way, and it definitely caught my attention. So I've watched a couple of reviews and I read a little bit about the game, got me interested, so I went online to find a copy. And guess what? The game is expensive. Now at the time it was not as expensive as it is today, but it was still a buck. But funny enough, I found a guy in the UK that had a complete in-box copy of it, North America copy, with the big box, the big manual, and the guy was asking for £150 for it, I believe. Now I don't know how to translate that to euros at the time, but it was around 180 euros, a little bit more in US dollars, but around that. And the thing is, a complete in-box copy of EarthBound nowadays for that price is a steal. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm still not an expert on the Super Nintendo department, but I think that £150 in 2010 was a good deal for EarthBound, for a complete in-box version of EarthBound. But I couldn't afford it, I really couldn't. I was still studying at the time, I was still living with my parents, so I just didn't have the money to spend on a single game. And to be honest with you, if you're starting out a new collection, to spend that much amount of money on a single game, with that money I could buy a lot of Super Nintendo games. And of course that I agree with quality versus quantity, but I was starting out on the Super Nintendo and there's a lot of good games for it. So I passed on that EarthBound, and the game increased in price. And nowadays, probably I will never get a complete in-box version of that game. Maybe I'll try to get the Japanese version and I'm okay with it. But anyhow, I forgot about the game until now. So how did I play EarthBound? On the SNES Classic Mini. As you guys know, if you have the SNES Mini, EarthBound is on it. And the cool thing about the system and the NES Mini, it's exactly this, you can play games that you can't afford, I guess. By the way, this is filled with ROMs, ROM hacks, homebrews. Shh, don't tell Nintendo. And finally, I had a couple of spare time on my schedule, and I I devoted that time to play EarthBound from start to finish. Now, first of all, did I enjoy the game? I did. A lot. I think that the game is a truly masterpiece, and now I understand why a lot of people like the game and why a lot of people hate the game. It definitely has a very strong cult following around it, but at the same time, it is not a game for everybody. Now, right from the beginning of the game, although this is a game that I've never played it before, and I honestly never played an RPG like this, I felt right at home with EarthBound. Mainly for two reasons, because this game reminded me a lot of stuff from my childhood. One of them is The Goonies, the movie. You know, the idea of a group of kids going on a quest or an adventure in, you know, an environment for grown-ups. I really felt a connection between Goonies and EarthBound. And the second thing is Pokemon. I truly see how the Pokemon team took a lot of influences and references from EarthBound. And I'm saying this on a very positive way, because I'm a big fan of the original Pokemon games on the Game Boy. But you know, stuff like Ash kinda reminds me a little bit of Ness, the environment of the game, the cities, you can ride a bicycle on EarthBound, even some items, you know, even some items are very similar to Pokemon. So that's why I felt right at home, because even though I haven't played it yet, I felt, you know, a couple of connections with stuff from my childhood. And the setting of the game, I mean, I'm not going to give any spoilers. It is really an adventure of a group of kids, each one with their unique skills and area of expertise, but the whole world, it really feels like, you know, a couple of kids, you know, children, lost in a grown-up's world. You know, the dialogues with NPCs, I mean, there's a lot of references to stuff like, you know, religion, economics, politics, and a very bizarre thing is that the game itself communicates with you. If you've played EarthBound before, you know what I'm talking about. So there's this huge paradox between, you know, grown-ups and kids. You know, the way they talk to you, the way they approach you, the stuff they say. It is very, very bizarre. So you're on a quest to defeat the evil guy Gygas, and along the way you meet a lot of characters. You start out with Ness, of course, then later on the rest of the party joins you. And one cool thing about this game is that sometimes in JRPGs, especially old school ones, sometimes you feel a little bit lost in the game, but EarthBound is a very fluid game, it really is. The story is simple and well told. I never felt lost in the game, I always knew where I had to go, and the game is, you know, very simple in that aspect. And it is one of those RPGs where, to me, it is not just about the story or the plot, it's really about the journey. The experience of playing this game is very immersive. And not just because of the story. Actually, what really drawn me into the game was the ambience of it, the way it looked, the way it is presented, and the music. I would compare EarthBound to a psychedelic, crazy, surrealistic environment. I think that if Salvador Dali was a game designer, he would probably develop a game like EarthBound. The game is a total trip. It is a total trip. Sometimes you have to check out if you're on acid or not. So let me talk about graphics. The graphics of the game are not impressive. You know, they're not bad graphics, but you know, if you compare them to other JRPGs from the time, you know, like I mentioned, you know, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Terra Enigma, in my opinion, the EarthBound graphics are not as good as those, even taking into account that this is a late release on the Super Nintendo. But probably one of the reasons was because I think that this game it took around 5 years to develop, and the team was always changing, and it's probably because of that. But the game has this kind of isometric perspective, and that really gives a very cool, you know, 3D placebo effect to it. Now, the combat system, and this is probably one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like the game. The combat system, it takes a little bit to get used to, because you're playing it on a first-person perspective. But then you get used to, and it is never boring, because, you know, your attacks and your skills, your magic, is always evolving. There's a lot of combinations that you can do, a lot of strategies, and you have an incredible diversity of enemies. And the cool thing is that you don't have random encounters. You can actually avoid your enemies on the screen. And if by any chance you are overpowered compared to an enemy, you don't have to battle. And you just have to clash with your enemy, and you receive the XP. So grinding in EarthBound, it is not a problem. And you don't have to grind a lot, but if you do, it will make your life a little bit easier. And speaking about the enemies, you fight with zombies, you fight with taxis, you fight with chandeliers. You heard it correctly. If you haven't played EarthBound yet, you fight with taxis and clowns and coffee mugs and vinyl records. It is very bizarre. The soundtrack of the game. The soundtrack, it's something between, something between Pink Floyd in 8-bit and Kraftwerk. It has a couple of catchy elements for sure, and sometimes is a little bit more, towards to the psychedelic rock, but other times it is, a completely acid trip experimental stuff. It is very original indeed, very interesting, and I've been listening to the soundtrack actually, and it works in the game. The visuals and the sounds just totally work. And honestly, I really want to give a try to the whole Mother series. I want to play Mother 1 on the NES and Mother 3 on the Game Boy Advance. And by the way, if you want to jump into the series, again, I'm not an expert, but I think that you can start with EarthBound if you want to, because it's like Final Fantasy. Each game is a different story on a different setting with different characters. And now I see, and now I do understand why a lot of people like EarthBound, because it is a game completely different from everything else, in my opinion. And the game does have a lot of cult following around it. It really does. The whole series. So if you have given it a try to EarthBound and if you don't like it, that is totally fine. But if you have doubts about the game, you should definitely give it a try. If you like JRPGs, if you like the Super Nintendo, if you're looking for something different to play, please play EarthBound. And of course that, nowadays you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars to get this game. Just play it on the SNES Classic Mini if you have one. Play it on emulation. Play it on the Virtual Console, on the Wii. But please, play the game. This is one of the reasons why I love retro gaming, Sometimes I just have that feeling, like everybody else, I want to play something new. Something exciting. And I don't need to play AAA games that are being released nowadays. I don't need a high-end PC with amazing graphics. We can always look back and find these little hidden gems from the past. So EarthBound and the Mother series, although it is a very fresh game for me, it is a game that it already made an impact on me as a gamer. It really did. It really did, and now I understand why people, spend a crazy amount of money to get this game. Because it is worth it. It is worth it because it is a good game, and it is worth it because, of course, it is a collectible. And now looking back, I totally regret for skipping on that EarthBound copy. Again, probably I will never get one, but the hunt is still on, and I'm going to pay closer attention to the auctions and if I can manage to score a copy of EarthBound. Again, I would be happy to get a Mother 2 version, which is cheap actually, but that completed in box North America version, yeah. Maybe it is a guilty pleasure, but I would like to have one. Now I understand the cult following around this game and why people want to have a completed in box version of it. So guys, please let me know, did you play EarthBound? Are you a fan of the Mother series, or it is just not your cup of tea? Let me know on the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to put a like on this video, please subscribe to the channel, and take care of yourselves, take care of the gaming community, and game a lot.